I want to read this book now. It's called White Servitude in Colonial South Carolina by Warren B. Smith. This is from the University of South Carolina Press. This is from 1961, and these are the contents of the book. The first fleet to sail for Carolina stopped at the island of Barbados to pick up men and supplies. Thus, many of the first settlers of Carolina came from Barbados. We already know they were sending so many European indentured servants and convicts and all these people, rebels, political prisoners to Barbados from England and Ireland. In the proposals of the Barbados men to settle in Carolina can be found the statement, there are many hundreds of noble families and well-experienced planters that are ready to move speedily, thither with Negroes and servants. The public records of England indicate quite clearly that many white servants were sent to Barbados, like I was just letting you know, right? This is history. All right, so who were they really bringing up from Barbados? You think it was Africans? In March 1655, the Council of State directed the governor of Tynemouth Castle to certify the number of prisoners taken at Dunbar, that they might be sent to Barbados. All right, in August 1655, the Council of State ordered the transportation to Barbados of all prisoners lately committed to the Marshalsea who were taken in the Breast-Man of War. In September 1655, the Council of State commanded the commissioners of the Admiralty to give orders for those English, Scotch, Irish, and Dutch mariners, prisoners in the Castle of Plymouth, to be sent to Barbados. All right, like I was just saying. All right, this is real history. It's not Africans they're sending to Barbados. In 1661, the Council and Assembly of Barbados passed an act for the good governance of servants. Now remember, we're talking about 1600s. Remember, let's not leave out all the New England tribes and all the American Indian people that were being sent down to Barbados as well. During the latter half of the 17th century, a constant stream of petitions flowed from Barbados, requesting the sending out of white servants. These facts are proof of the acceptance of the institution of white servitude by the Barbadians, and therefore indirectly by the first settlers of South Carolina. It would not be unreasonable to expect that among the Carolina immigrants were some who were already serving indentures and inured to the conditions of such servitude, all right? It's not unreasonable to expect that these immigrants were indentured servants. These first settlers were indentured servants themselves. This is not merely a matter of inference. Proof can be found in the passenger list of the Carolina, one of the 3 ships that sailed for Carolina from England. Again, from England in 1699. I bet you you're going to find colored people in that ship, and they're not Africans. In this ship, there were 16 passengers who brought a total of 63 servants, as well as 13 passengers who had no servants. The complete list of names follows. All right, and this is the names. Captain Sullivan. All right. I guess these are the people and their servants. All right. So we're assuming these are all white people. This is what we're assuming. But don't assume that. There's colored people in here too. It is true that no statement is made as to the character of service to be rendered by these servants. Possibly some of the above were paid personal servants, but the more likely presumption is that many of them were indentured servants. That's the reality. Just prior to the departure of this fleet, the proprietors had offered a head right of 150 acres of land to every freeman coming out before March 25th, 1670. Again, 150 acres of whose land? Whose land they're taking and giving away to these indentured servants as a head right system, like as freedom dues for completing their time or for setting up a plantation. Plus 150 acres for every able manservant carried with him, and 100 acres for every woman servant, and for every manservant under 16. You hear this? The amount of land to be granted for transporting servants was to be reduced each year for 2 consecutive years. The greatest advantage therefore pertained to bringing servants to the province during the first year. Continuing further down, says the Carolina, again the ship that brought these servants from England, still under the command of Henry Brain, returned in the fall of 16 70 to Barbados to pick up second load of colonists, right? So-called colonists. Among these were indentured servants. Probably most of them were indentured servants. They were going to go pick up. They needed labor. Their names and the time that each had yet to serve were proved before Thomas Gray. So again, this is an example. Thomas Whitty, a sawyer, is to serve 2 years. He still had 2 years left. He was serving time. Toaz Patterson, a carpenter, is to serve 2 years. All right, so these are the examples. So you see, these people were being sold and transported like property, and their service basically be sold. John Radcliffe, the last named, developed a decided passion for troublemaking and occupied considerable space in the early records of the colony. Indentured servants were among the earliest arrivals in Carolina, both from the mother country and from the islands. All right, from the islands. What Caribbean islands? Mother country. They're not talking about Mama Africa here. They're talking about mother country. Their mother country, England. The mother country, the British Isles. And then what islands? The Caribbean. They ain't talking about Africa here. So again, the labor, the indentured servants slash slaves that they were using, again, were from the mother country and England or the Caribbean. They weren't coming directly from Africa. Series, there's so many books. I can do so many series, but I just want you to, hopefully it's clear by now. And if you're doing the numbers and you see I'm going to different states, different references, different sources saying the same thing, whereas the Africans come in at all. The reason for the introduction of white servants into South Carolina fall under the three general heads: to aid in the settlement of the country. All right, they needed to create colonies and plantations, right, to meet the labor shortage. All right, well, so why didn't they just go to Africa then? No, they had their own labor, right? They had local labor here, the aboriginals, and they had their own undesirables and convicts and all these people they needed to bring over here and get rid of, and to defend the colony. The initial need, of course, was for the settlement of the country. We continue in the book White Servitude in Colonial South Carolina. All right, very scholarly book from the University of South Carolina, and these are just copies of indentures. It says indentures of white servants were copied in the records of the Register and Secretary of the Province, now in the South Carolina Archive. These two, dated 1669 and 1671-72, were among the first recorded. So they're talking about this one right here, and this one says this indenture. All right, starts out with that. There's another one right here, this indenture. It says above another early indenture dated 1673. The inventory below is proof positive that there were white servants in South Carolina in 1718. All right, 1718 still what? White servitude. Where's the Africans? Right now, so how do they get white people from this? Right, where do you see the people? So they're saying white. Remember, they're saying white because these are Europeans. So we are to assume that these are all white people. All right, but yes, a lot of these were white people. I'm just saying, don't leave out the colored Europeans. In June 1756, Governor Littleton reported that the whole number landed here was 1,023, of whom 109 have died, and 273 have been shipped off or made their escape. Some had been put to work on fortifications, but their behavior was disquieting, largely by reason of their own claim that they were prisoners of war. They did not come as servants. They were people who had been forcibly disposed, all right, these prisoners of war, these rebels, right? Perhaps no other colony could have handled the matter as South Carolina finally did. In 1712, the care of the poor had been put under the charge of vestries and church wardens. So when the Acadians became charity cases, the obligation for their keep became largely an item of parish administration. The French Huguenots, again, I was just saying, right? The French Huguenots had settled along the Santee River. So it is not surprising to find Acadians sent to Prince Frederick William. The vestry books of this parish record a number of large families, apportioned among the regular parishioners. On April 4th, 1759, over 3,000 pounds was allowed for maintenance of the French Acadians. All right, look at the parentheses, right? French Acadians, what are they really? 2/3 of this went to the church wardens of St. Philip's, Charlestown. Continuing the book, White Servitude in Colonial South Carolina. We're in chapter 4, and it says here, sources of supply. Right? After consideration of the various reasons for introducing white servants, attention should next be given to the sources from which they were drawn. Disbanded soldiers, defeated rebels, orphans, convicts, destitute Irish, and poor Protestants made up the more important contributing groups. In 1697, the Council of Trade and Plantations was concerned whether the king would be pleased to be at the charge of transporting any disbanded soldiers to the colonies. The end of the war in Europe should have provided an opportunity at this time for new servants. Convicts were among those brought out of Carolina as servants. All right, an advertisement was run in the Gazette during the fall of 1739 for two runaways from Virginia. 2 years later, Robert Ellicott, a convict felon, was advertised for in the same newspaper. One report from Georgia referred to Thomas Wright, a transported convict who had gone with several traders to Carolina. Yet, on the whole, the average servant in South Carolina was perhaps of a higher type than those in the other colonies. At least the leaven of social outcasts was remarkably few as far as the records of the colony indicate. It says here in 1672, Jamaica declared that whereas diverse thefts, felonies, and other enormities have been committed lately on Port Royal, which cannot be imputed to anything but the greater number of malefactors and other convicts yearly brought from His Majesty's prisons in England. Where's the descendants for all these people? Shouldn't Jamaica be more white? Now, all these Jamaicans, are they all aboriginal? And that's what I'm trying to let you guys to think about, right? And it's not to bash anybody, to make anybody feel any less aboriginal, but look into your own family history. And, you might have melanated Europeans as your ancestors. We're talking about so-called Negroes, Europeans, or so-called Black Irish, Black English, Black Scottish people, coming down or being sent to Jamaica as convicts, rebels that they lost. Remember Monmouth's rebellion, all these things. Undesirables. Tina says the destitute Irish represented another important source of servants. Right, the Irish, right? The presence of large numbers of destitute people at home had provided a supply, especially in the early 17th century when the economic writers still felt England to be overpopulated. With the coming of the Industrial Revolution, ideas about overpopulation changed. There was less reason to believe that England was overpopulated, and therefore the destitute Irish became a principal source of indentured servants for the colonies. Remember, there was many people living in Ireland already that had been outcasted to Ireland from England, from Scotland, Germany, France, all these places. Many of these servants were carried out to the colonies, and a lot of these people were carried out to what? The American colonies. The mercantile firms, as importers of servants, were not too careful about their treatment, as the more important purpose of the transaction was to get ships over to South Carolina, which could carry local produce back to Europe. Consequently, the Irish, as well as others, suffered greatly. This was particularly true during the period when slave importations into Carolina had been prohibited. It was almost as if the British merchants had redirected their vessels from the African coast to the Irish coast. They had redirected. They were never going over there, at least not to bring anybody to America. With the white servants coming over in much the same fashion as the African slaves. What African slaves? But they're telling you straight up right here. I pulled the baby from the water. All right, they're letting you know. Same thing. Just like they were treating the indentured servants, it was the same. Cramming them up in these ships, bringing them in these horrible conditions. Nathaniel Russell described in 1767, just after coming to Charlestown as agent for Rhode Island merchants, the barbarous conditions under which the Irish were brought in. About 6 weeks passed, a ship arrived here from Belfast with a number of passengers. The owners of merchants there being very anxious to procure as many passengers as possible. Instead of 200, which was the most they could bring with comfort, they brought out 450, and their agreement was for 19 inches room and width for each person, but they scarcely had 7. There being so much crowded and the bad usage they met with from the master of the ship, who cut them off in their allowances of provision, almost 3/4 brought on a distemper, which carried off upwards of 100 on the passage. The survivors were in a most pitiful condition. When they arrived here, there were many parents who buried all their children, and many children without parent, friend, or relation. As soon as they landed, they were ordered into the barracks. The church wardens immediately carried about subscriptions to raise a sum of money for their relief, and in 2 days had upwards of £200 sterling subscribed exclusively of blankets, linen, cloths, and every necessary that the sick and naked stood in need of. You see how they were bringing these people over here, right? Continuing the book, White Servitude in Colonial, South Carolina, from the University of South Carolina. We're in chapter 5. And they continue talking about the sources of different indentured servants. And this is about the poor Protestants of Europe. All right, they say it's here by far the largest number, and certainly the most important group of the white indentured servants were the poor Protestants from Europe. All right, so real quick, I want you to dodge the hijack big time. No, history tells us a lot of these Protestants, especially the Huguenots were mixed with a lot of Moriscos and Sephardic Jews who had converted over to Christianity. These were largely voluntary immigrants seeking to escape a condition become intolerable at home because of economic, religious, and political oppression. As these conditions were more or less prevalent in all parts of the European world, there was a sprinkling of many nationalities among the colony's servant class. Of course, since the Catholics were discouraged from coming, the immigrants were representative of the northern Protestant nations. And this is an ad from 1749. It says, to be sold on board the Georgetown Galley, that's the ship, Thomas Crathmade, master line at the Franklin's Wharf, sundry English servants, men, women, well recommended, amongst whom are tradesmen, husbandmen, and indented for 4 years. Says here, another one, runaway, 3 white servants. Oh, this is a runaway ad. Check it out. It says, wait, 3 white servants lately imported. So 3 runaway white servants. All right. This is an ad about the German Palatine servants. All right. So all these ads existed in these years. It says down here, the arrival of servants was advertised in postscript to the South Carolina Gazette, November 27, 1749 above, and they ran away. The Gazette notified South Carolinians to be on the lookout for them. So, okay, so these people, same people that had gone in there from England, had run away right away. You see that? Right away as soon as they got here. These ain't Africans. And continuing the book regarding the Protestants, right? I just want to get some numbers here of certain ships loads of Protestants. So, quoting here, it says, just before this act was passed, the governor announced to the council that 2 vessels are at present in this harbor with upward of 800 foreign Protestants on board, and 2 others are hourly expected with the like number. Ships, you hear this, right? Vessels with 800 people, and they were expecting more coming in. So these are all servants, right? What they would call slaves, indentured servants. Where's the Africans? Continuing, says January 31st, 1753, says thus Ross and ship Elizabeth arrived from Rotterdam with 319 Protestants on board from Germany. All right, were all these people pale skin or white just because they were coming from Germany? That's what you got. That's the hijack you got to dodge. This is what I'm trying to make you aware of. We can't assume these were all white people. I know in this book it keeps saying white servitude, white, because they want you to think that everybody in Europe was white, just like they want you to think that everybody who's being called Negro was from Africa, and that's not true. It's the same thing. All right? So look at all these numbers, all these shiploads of these Europeans coming as indentured servants. This is the labor force, not Africans. This is 1753. 1753. Why are you paying people? Because you got to pay these people, right? You got to give them their freedom dues. Why are you still paying them when you got Africans? Free labor. It says down here, Ms. Janny Reville has compiled a list of many German, Irish, and French Protestants. All of the important groups that came in from February 19, 1763 through January 23, 1773 are listed below. February 19, 1763, 70 Irish petitions for lands in Boonesborough Township. And it says here, and given the date, you see the date, 89 poor Protestants from Ireland, 150 poor Protestants from Ireland. And different date here, 45 Germans petitioned for land. It says here 81 French Protestants. These French Protestants, these Huguenots. All right, December 24, 1764, 56 German Protestants. Over here it says 306 Germans, 59 German, 80 Irish Protestants, 192 Germans from Rotterdam, 51 Irish, 128 Germans from Amsterdam, 155 Germans, 172 Irish, 227 Irish. Look at the dates. 437 Irish, 201 Irish. Look, these are Protestants supposedly. 414 Irish. The dates. 268 Irish, 231, 238. All right, you see the number 418 Irish. The evidence is thus plentiful that thousands of poor Protestants, thousands of poor Protestants came to Carolina as indentured servants or as redemptioneers. Again, they're letting you know in this book that there's strong evidence that thousands and thousands of poor Protestants came into Carolina as indentured servants. This is just the Protestants. All right, every other group is not even being counted that came to Carolina right now. All right, so remember that all these Protestants, South Carolina, we're going to get this in another video, the French Huguenots, what they have to do in South Carolina, and who are they? Protestants as well.